Well, happy Tuesday, everybody. My name is Jake Milstein. Welcome to using the new White House cyber the new White House strategy to get better cybersecurity. Um, Off to a great start, clearly.
Because it's
So
it's Pi Day.
it's and right, I should have put up a picture of pie. So happy Pie Day, everybody. So I want to tell everybody why we are doing this. So last week we did a urgent panel discussion about the new White House cyber strategy. Um, and as that happened, and right before it happened, um, some some folks, some of our customers, some folks we know said, "Wait, can you be a little more prescriptive? Like, if we're all going to have to comply with this new cyber strategy, what does that actually mean for my organization?" And we heard that from a city. We heard that from a water district. And I heard it from a rural healthcare organization. And we're going to get to that in a little bit because anyway, there's a whole thing about how this is going to change things for rural healthcare. And I saying that because I see there's some rural healthcare friends of ours in the audience here. So that is why we're doing this webinar today. And for those of you who haven't been before, chat is on the right. Let us know where you're joining from. Love to see some old friends in there. Also, there's a little bell with a strike through on the upper right, and you can click that if you want to turn off the bleep 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 of the chat. I think we turned it off as default, so if you want to turn on the bleep bleep bleep, you can hit that button too. And everybody joining will get a recording of this. The system will send you a recording. As a reminder, system is a system. And so if you don't get a recording, just go ahead and email me, Jake at criticalinsight.com, and say, Jake, I need a recording. And we'll get you a recording. Okay. So who are we? For those of you who don't know us, Critical Insight defends critical infrastructure against cyber attacks. We help organizations prepare for an attack. We help them detect an attack quickly, and we help them respond decisively. And later in this webinar, we're going to get into how we can help folks with the new strategy, the new White House cybersecurity strategy. Now, joining me today is Michael Hamilton, who I will always refer to as Mike. So Mike Hamilton is founder of this company. He's also our CISO, which means anytime I want to buy marketing stuff, he says no. And former CISO of the city of Seattle. My name's Jake Milstein. I run marketing and host our events. And what that means to you all is when you have questions and you put them in the chat, I will read them. I will read the questions and have Mike do it. And so usually in our events, we have more people. This time we decided just me and Mike, let's try to get a bunch of information out there and answer a bunch of questions. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about the strategy themes, what it means, and then what to do. So we're going to go through. So we're assuming that you all have read the cybersecurity strategy or came to the event last week. If you need an overview of it, put it in the chat and we can do a quick overview of it. But we're assuming that. So we're going to go into strategy themes, what they mean, what you should do. Then we're going to talk about the impact on different sectors. We're going to talk about legal. We're going to talk about state and local government. We're going to talk about health sector. We're going to talk about how NIST CSF, so that's NIST Cybersecurity Framework, fits in because it's a very important part of this. And then we're going to talk about how we can help. And so, one person chat saying they need a quick overview. So, Mike, quick overview of this of the White House cybersecurity strategy is for years and years and years. The federal government has come up with new cybersecurity strategies, and nothing has actually happened. And as we have all felt, attacks have continued to happen. And so now, after doing a whole public-private partnership of interviews, they've come up with a large strategy that that feels like it has more momentum than anything in the past, right, Mike?
Well, it's better thought through. It's better designed. And it's actually got some accountability built into it, right? They're going to measure things. They're going to measure success to see if, this was the right thing to do. There are essentially 5 parts to it. Part one is all about defending critical infrastructure. So there's going to be new requirements for critical sectors. They talked about fixing the underlying infrastructure protocols of the internet, DNS, BGP, etc., getting everybody converted to IPv6. A lot of this is um, um, headed towards the critical sectors that the federal government already has purview over in terms of regulation. So when they say, and you will hear this about this strategy, there's new regulation coming. Well, I take a little bit of issue with Jake's word, comply with this. You only have to comply with this under certain circumstances. However, it's going to cascade down to everyone. That's what we're going to talk
Hmm.
today about. So it's defend critical infrastructure. It's disrupt and dismantle threat actors, which has got some interesting pieces to there. That's probably the only to do for the private sector in there is they think they're going to create um, um, small, nimble groups of volunteers from private sector companies to help hack back. Okay, that is, I doubt that will happen. And so that's not really a big focus of today. The third one is shape market forces. Use market forces to get security. We will talk a lot about that today. Next one is invest in resilience because we are moving into artificial intelligence and quantum computing, and we have to make sure that the world doesn't blow up because of that. So that was really a big focus of that section was the new technologies that are coming, prioritized next generation research and development. But there is some investment that is going to flow. So we will talk a little bit about that. And then the last one was international partnerships. So we need global rules. So it was defend critical infrastructure, disrupt and dismantle threat actors, shape market forces, invest in resilience, and work on international partnerships. Those were the five parts of this. Um, uh, Without going into a lot of detail, and I would really recommend reading the actual.
And I did put it in the chat so
Okay,
people can
yeah,
take a look at it.
it's it's a great read. It's not hard to read at all.
So what I put in the chat is the White House fact sheet. You can actually click through a link there to read the entire document. So
Mhm.
if you came to the event last week, new since last week. So President Biden put in his federal budget, which we'll get to whether it's dead on arrival in a second, but it has $3.1 billion for CISA. Um, $200 million of that for the Technology Modernization Fund, and that is, reducing the tech debt that the government has. 98 million to implement the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, and this is important because that's part of the new requirement in here that critical infrastructure report cyber attacks in 72 hours. $425 million for the new cyber analytics data system aimed at improving internal cybersecurity and analytical capabilities. And then the question is, will it pass? And, like anything, you see two things. One is because the House is controlled by Republicans at this point, it's dead on arrival. And the other thing that I saw was um, was the opposite, which is that they will take money out of some of the things that they believe the White House wants and instead put them into cybersecurity. So there's some thought that the negotiations over it could actually end up with more money for this because it is a popular thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Two quick points to make right here. Number one, that fourth bullet point where they're talking about the 98 million or whatever to set up the analytics data system. That's actually that's the end run that they did to avoid creating another agency, because the talk was this Bureau of Cyber Statistics that they wanted to stand up, and instead CISA is just going to run that site. So collecting data like that through the CIRCIA critical infrastructure reporting mechanism, right, will help us to understand, what our threat surface looks like, what the bad guys are doing, etc. My belief is that's also going to be used to inform insurance companies so that they can price risk better. So I think that was a really interesting one. Second point I'll make is that the fact that a whole bunch of, well, Congress writ large just had its own health data ripped off for all the Congress people. And I have to think that may spur them to action to fund some of these things and to notably get on top of the legislation that was called for in this strategy for a an accountability framework or a liability framework for software developers. And I don't mean people who code. I mean companies like Microsoft that
Right.
sell software. So, Congress having their own health records ripped off may have a positive effect here.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So now we're going to go through the themes. Like this theme is using market forces, and then we're going to talk about what it means and then what you should do. Mike.
Okay, so boiling this down, because we went into a lot of detail last time and went through all of the kind of the features and the requirements that were coming out. The one that I'm going to leave out, the theme of regulation, because regulation is really landing on sector specific agencies, and you'll see in a bit here how they're already moving on these things. And a lot of this again was spurred by Colonial Pipeline, and we found out that their sector specific agency was the TSA, and the TSA had never said you need to get cyber secure if you're going to be moving fuel around in pipes. Well, so now all of the SSAs have heard from the White House, and they are quickly moving into more regulation through the rulemaking process for the critical sectors. All right, that's not the private sector for the most part, so we're not gonna touch that one right now. But do know that things are coming for water, dams, finance, energy, health, etc., etc. Okay, so this theme, use market forces. So this is something that the federal government has always done. An example of this is their CMMC program, the Cybersecurity
Maturity.
Maturity Model Certification. Okay, which says, and this thing has been in place for a while and then kind of had fits and starts getting going. What it says is, if you want to bid on a government opportunity, right, then you have to show that you are one of these levels of maturity depending on the sensitivity of the data you're going to be holding. It's either controlled unclassified information or federal contracting information. Those are two types in scope. So using that idea, that methodology, federal government has a lot of money to spend, and this is going to, the interesting article in Forbes today, or I guess it was yesterday, talking in very clear terms about how this is going to cascade down to everyone. So security is now, but will be considered to be a competitive differentiator for whatever business you are in. If it sells to government, you're going to have to show your papers. And this theme of show your papers is going to come up over and over and over. So just like CMMC requires you to be a certain level of maturity, that's not going to land that hard on most of the private sector, but every agency that buys anything, and this is going to go down to state and local government. This is what the new world is going to look like. So um, the IoT labeling and the software bill of materials, those are efforts from the government to put big seals of approval on stuff like Underwriter Labs, so that what you're buying is secure. So that's one effort that they're making to get the manufacturers, the vendors, to get their stuff secure. And again, Congress is going to have to take up this issue of this liability framework. So if your software or your IoT camera does not come with, secure out of the box, um, they actively search for vulnerabilities. When vulnerabilities are identified, the patch is created and the patch is distributed to all of the customers of that product. Right? That's what it's got to look like. And there's already certification systems for things like this. The one that comes to mind is Common Criteria EAL4. But they this is not the end all be all, right? It's not just we're going to put seals of approval on products so that you can buy them. It's you are going to have to show your security papers in order to work for the government. If you sell a product, that product has got to be known secure. If you are selling a service, you're going to get asked for, show us your NIST cybersecurity framework alignment or your ISO certification in some cases. So what you should do, um, if you don't do it yet, and this has always been a good idea, and I know a lot of folks on this call, because I know a lot of you have already done this, but a security review needs to go into your procurement process. When you're deciding on what to buy, one of the criteria that you need to evaluate is security. And there are ways to do that. There are simple ways to do that. You can, just ask for, show me your SOC 2, or show me the last assessment you did against this product, or whatever. But definitely add a security gate to your procurement process. um, you are going to need security papers to show, and I don't care what business you're in, you need to get an assessment, and you need to start building those controls up to an auditable level, because everybody's going to be asking for these. Business associates, customers, shareholders, everybody's getting into this game here, and it's not going to stop.
And Mike, so two questions from the chat here.
Yeah.
One, one from Mike Sloan, and service providers too. Will they need to be certified? I mean, I think the answer here is, well, yeah. Like I think that's the
If you won't
direction.
hire them unless they are, then the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think that's the using market forces. And then Danny asked a question that I'm going to change a little bit here. Right now, there are all these different standards: FDIC, NCUA, those are the banking ones,
Hmm.
and credit union, HIPAA,
Hmm. Graham
healthcare,
Leach Bliley. Yep.
GLBA. How soon does the White House strategy start driving those? Because right now we have different standards for everything. I
Yeah.
think I think part of this is
So
to
that's a really
align
good
it all,
question.
right?
This is a really good question. And one of the things FedGov is doing is aligning everybody with the NIST CSF. And there's reasons to do that. And we're going to get into that a little bit more down the road here. But just one spoiler: Health and Human Services has already released new guidance that replaces a HIPAA risk assessment with a NIST CSF based risk assessment for your compliance. So it's already starting to happen. And, I mean, a long time ago, when the government came up with, the idea of an outcome based framework that could be applied to any business, it was pretty clear this is going to land on everybody. Okay, and then that last bullet.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Last bullet.
Yeah, I mean, so Mike's comment about service providers. Yeah, you want to see security controls from service providers. Especially if somebody's going to, be servicing a technology product and they need to do that remotely and things like that. You don't want them coming in from some, unmanaged endpoint using authentication credentials that are lame. I mean, so yeah, I want to say certified, but you need to evaluate controls.
Yep.
Go ahead and go to the next slide, Jake.
Accountability.
Accountability is another theme in here. So this is the one where Congress is definitely going to have to get involved, because this issue of liability for software providers, there's going to be a lot of pushback on that. And we know that new regulation is not one of the favorite things that this Congress is going to like to take up. But again, having their own records poached right before this lands on their desk may spur them to action. Who knows? There will be additional responsibilities for cloud providers, because the shared responsibility model, apparently federal government doesn't think that one is good enough. And I frankly will say that, everybody that loses data from, implementing a cloud VPC or putting an application in the cloud, 95% of the time, that's a self-inflicted wound. You just forgot to, change credentials from default or something like that, or, something that was completely uncredentialed, an S3 bucket holding a lot of temporary data that somebody just forgot about. Um, but again, federal government thinks that cloud providers need to be more explicit about exactly what they will do in terms of security versus what your responsibility is. I think that's just going to be coming up with the clarity around this, but it may include cloud providers doing things like evaluating your configuration for you. Cloud security posture examination is getting to be its own little, Gartner, buzzword these days. But I think the cloud providers are probably in the best place to do that. Even more focus on third party risk management. Again and again and again, this thing comes up, right? It's part of using the power of the purse, it's part of this accountability. So, doing real third party risk management, and there are, you can scale that to where, that can, you can hand roll it. There are services out there that you can use that are actually pretty good, that will let you do things like see if risk is concentrated in a certain supply of yours. um, that turns out to be pretty useful. I've seen a couple of systems that do that. And then this issue about limitations on data collection. This one is fascinating. So this has to do with litigation, mainly, that's coming out of California Consumer Privacy Act. Whenever there is a unauthorized disclosure of privacy information, it is now followed by a class action suit a couple of days later. Attorneys will go round up a couple of plaintiffs and off to the races. So, what the federal government would like to do is devalue um, the data. And so they're going to have stricter limitations on what can be collected. And especially if you monetize data and you sell it, your business practices are going to have to change. And there have been articles coming out recently about how the ad industry is a little freaked out about this. The we're capitalists, right? We run on consumption. That's our job, right? We buy plastic stuff to put on the lawn at Christmas time, then send it to a landfill. That is our job in the world, to buy stuff. Well, that buying stuff is all driven by, you know, ads, right? Putting advertising in and convincing you to consume. Well, if they are going to now put strict limitations on what you can collect, what you can store, what you can share, what you can sell, et cetera, et cetera, that means the ad industry is going to need to start doing business
So,
differently. It also
and,
means, go ahead, Jake.
and my question comes in here from Ricardo. Can you provide an example of a service that examines the risk of suppliers?
UpGuard. UpGuard is one that I've looked at that I like. UpGuard.
Yeah. I mean, additionally, one of the things, well, we'll get to this in a little bit, but one of the things you want to do is make sure that you have a third party risk management program, which is something that we help with. Right,
Yes,
Mike?
absolutely. Um, so okay, so this accountability, right? And the accountability issue is really a source of a lot of discussion in boardrooms right now in the C-suite, because if security is being handled correctly, and a lot of you on this call know this, the way it's done is you identify risk, you take that risk through a governance organization, and you put it on the governance organization to say, we're going to accept this risk, we're going to mitigate this risk and spend some money on it, are we going to transfer this through insurance? And you all agree, and those executive fingerprints are there. Well, if a risk goes unaddressed after going through that process, they're actually starting to talk about executive negligence. So, developing security processes in your organization to manage risk, to do all of the moving parts that are going to be necessary here. When we say NIST framework, it's not just filling out a spreadsheet. There's stuff you got to do, and we can talk a bit about that. These cloud standards that are going to come out, it's just like FedRAMP. If you're the federal government, you have to use FedRAMP. You need to use cloud service providers that are aligning with these standards that are going to come out of the federal government. So we know what you do, you know what we do. We're all doing security together, and they need to be audited. You can't just take somebody's word at something. A third party needs to examine these.
And and so this came up in another webinar we were doing, but one of the things that we've seen in the last 6 months, just in our business, is the people coming to us for cloud security posture management
Hmm.
assessments and advice has gone way up. And I was also just at a rural hospital conference where a board member said to me, "Well, we put all our stuff in the cloud, so it's safe, right?"
Wrong.
Um, Thanks, Mike. We didn't know it was wrong, but now we do. Thanks. But in any event, yeah, it's that is something that we provide, and something that we've seen a huge uptick in is, hey, we put everything in the cloud now. Like, let's assess the controls.
Hmm.
Not necessarily the right order, but there you go.
Okay, moving on. Contracts, contract language. The legal folks are going to need to do some diving in here. We, I think, have talked about before, the fact that if you contractually require your business associates to have cyber insurance, whether or not they have any cyber exposure to your business, it means they've been put through a set of standards. The insurance company had to do it. Insurance companies are the de facto regulators of everyone right now. So that if somebody has this kind of insurance, they've had to meet some kind of standard. So that's always been a good thing. Well, we need to start thinking about, indemnification liability, limiting that kind of exposure, because this accountability thing it's a close friend of liability and litigation. And then again, if you are collecting data, especially consumer data, and especially if you monetize it, man, take a look at that stuff, because what you're holding is very dangerous. These class action suits that are being driven by the privacy statutes coming out of California and elsewhere are real serious in terms of their penalties. And I think this one may be a way of incentivizing Congress to take up privacy legislation so that we can do it once for the country instead of 50 times in 50 states. Right? That's how we ended up with 50 data breach reporting statutes, and why that's a mess now, because the federal government never took it up. Okay, go to the next slide, Jake.
All right. And Mike Sloan asks, ignorance does not exempt you from accountability, or does it? No,
No.
especially if you have attendance in a webinar like this. Okay, keep going, Hamilton.
Okay, and then investment. And this one is mostly intended for the public sector, but they're also going to invest in R&D. So there's going to be grants to assist with the development of secure critical infrastructure. So if you are in a critical sector, there will be grants coming to you because they want you to get secured. There is the state and local cyber grant program that is referenced a little bit in the strategy that's already on the table. So definitely, use that. And then other incentives for more private sector. So, for example, if your manufacturing process of your whatever your IoT device, your camera, whatever it is, you need investment to get that up to where it is secure by design, secure out of the box, with a strategy to keep it secure with time. Maybe there's some investment that's needed there, and I think the federal government is going to be supporting that as well. They talk about incentives. Those incentives could be tax breaks. So, right, any investment you make, then you can write that down. So there will be opportunities for grant application, and hopefully, we're far enough along with the planning committees in the state and local cyber grant program that this will start to bear fruit fairly soon. Um, Not all states are moving right along. I can say that I've talked to a number that are really just not moving along at all. But to the extent possible, if you can gain visibility into the planning that's going on in your state, um, find out where all that is going. Those processes are fairly opaque. But if you can find out what they are going to do in terms of an all of state plan, you are going to have to justify your request for funding against that plan with an assessment. You can't just say you need something. You got to have somebody come in and look at you against a framework, and everybody's saying the NIST CSF is the way to go. So, right, you're going to identify a gap, and then you're going to make a funding request to close that gap. You will end up with a lot of gaps. So, I would, to the extent possible, again, see if they're getting any visibility into that planning committee in your state.
And hey, Mike, so John is looking for some specifics here. So, going back to asking people for their papers, so for example, an asphalt contractor to a city will need to document they are following security guidelines, even if it's just use of email and dispatch software, right?
I say yes, right? Because remember, business email compromise is a problem. That's a vendor to the city. right? If they are compromised and somebody sends email to the city that says, here's our new bank account because we were Silicon Valley Bank customers, here's our new account, and the city then starts to pay, that's bad. So yes, you're going to want to see these practices coming out of everywhere. Now it's risk based, and so that's the way we do it here. I would not ask for the same level of security controls to be demonstrated to me for an asphalt contractor as I would for, say, somebody who um, remotely does maintenance on HVAC systems, for example, right? So it's risk based. And there, if if we have time, we can talk about how you can hand roll a little system to start gathering these attestations and proof of security controls, um, depending on what kind of risk they represent to you. Um, and then the last thing here, watch for these tax breaks and these incentives. It's going to be a while, but they seem to be moving fairly quickly on some things. At least CISA is, and I think CISA is being a pretty effective organization in implementing things and making them move along quickly. So tax breaks and other incentives, there may be an announcement coming out there sooner rather than later. We'll find out. But if they want everybody to invest in making products secure so that the federal government knows that when they buy something, they can trust it, and that will cascade down to state and local government. And then eventually, the idea is, or the desire is, that everybody take up a strategy like this. So watch for news of here's what you can do to help your organization be more secure and maybe be able to write down some of the investments that you make.
All right. So review, Mike.
Okay.
And by the way, this isn't the end. We're going to go into NIST after this, but we just want to recap. Go ahead.
Yeah. So here's the most distilled bullet list I could come up with, right? And remember, the regulation part of this probably not going to land on you anytime soon, but these practices are going to be viewed in the light of, we will only spend money if you can demonstrate that you are not a risk to us, or if your product cannot be demonstrated as being secure and with a security plan. So, number one, begin aligning your organization with a framework. For real, everybody is going to have to do this. Everybody's going to have, just like in the health sector, they've had business associate agreements for a long time with all kinds of language in there about keeping things secure, potentially having policies that are consistent with those required by HIPAA. This is going to go to all sectors, right? If you do business with, I don't know, the water sector, they're going to require this of you. Okay. Monitor the security of your vendors. And, again, there's online services to do this. There will probably be more popping up as a result of the national strategy. Um, if you are regulated, if you're in a critical sector and you're regulated, then you have to have auditable process from your vendors, right? Which means somebody's got to go in and grade their work. It's not just their attestation. Number three, use your purchasing power, right? Make security a line item on your procurement process, so that that's one of the things that you evaluate, right? Yeah, we want it to be, effective. We want it to be cheap, but we want it to be secure too. And that actually that's not that easy to do, because every product has, something different you would ask for in terms of demonstrating security. But, make that part of your procurement process, and what you will effectively be doing. And this is kind of the point of a lot of this. You're pushing the requirement for security onto your vendors and service providers and technology product manufacturers, rather than inheriting their bad security and having to defend yourself against it. Right? It's this whole transfer of responsibility that's talked about in the strategy. Contract language. Yep. Get on that contract language and make sure that there are parts of that that require these things, right? Require you to stay current in your annual obligations for keeping yourself secure, and there are a lot of those. And we'll talk about that when we get to this NIST framework business. Um, and then limit your data collection. This one's going to land hard. This and I think again, kind of a side door into getting something else that the federal government would like to get but knows it can't get through legislation is to tamp down all of the disinfo and just fake stuff hung in front of people to rile them up on social media platforms, because that's done because they know that enraging you keeps you more engaged than showing you puppies. Okay. And if that's done so that they can hang ads in front of you, and all of a sudden those ads can't collect the information to target you with advertising that disincentivizes the social media platforms for keeping you enraged, which moves a different needle.
And
It,
I was going to say, from a marketing standpoint, I see this one a little bit differently. Where the way that I think this is going to go is that's one of the ways that they're going to move the budget dollars through Congress is in an anti Facebook, an anti big tech thing, to get this passed. I think that's what people should watch out for there. So that's just a guess of And so Rob says data collection: are data obtained or receiving data or both? We're a public agency, not sure this applies to us necessarily.
yeah, so you don't monetize the data, but you do collect data that have, implications to these privacy statutes if lost. Now, a class action against the public sector means we'd be suing ourselves, and I don't see that happening, but I would still limit data collection.
And just as a note to Rob here, one of the things we just saw in the health sector is that hospitals were using Meta, so Facebook, a pixel, in their patient portals to gather information. What they didn't realize was that Meta was then reselling that information for marketing. And uh, one of the things that I heard in the last week is that it's just a pixel from Meta, and that there are plenty of public agencies that also use pixels in various different services with various different vendors that are the same. So I'd also watch out for that. All right, Speaking of sectors, Mike.
Yeah, I want to address Elizabeth here real quick. She's talking about Log4j and open source software and things like that. One of the things that the federal government is doing is this software bill of materials. So they're not going to buy software if it doesn't come with a complete provenance of all of the parts in it. And we know the security implications of all those things. So this is directly addressing that Log4j issue. And when a software vendor implements open source in their product and sells it to the federal government and it doesn't meet this this SBOM standard, yeah, they're going to be liable. That's but again, I think legislation is going to have to happen for that liability framework, and that's that's probably where this is going to get stuck.
All
Okay.
right, sectors, Mike.
Sure. All right. So if you are in a government organization, yeah, you want to do your assessment, you want to get your grant applications in, and you definitely want to work on that procurement process, because what the federal government does has a lot of implication, because federal government supplies a lot of money to state governments. They're going to want you to line up with this, and so you're going to need to work on that procurement process and make sure that you only buy things from vendors that can demonstrate the security of their product or their service. And I say especially in utilities, human services, and treasury. And do you know why? Because those are
Why,
those are
Mike?
because those are critical sectors, right? You may not be uh, a, a, a water district all by yourself. You're a municipal water utility. Well, the EPA is still telling you what to do. Human services, that's HIPAA. Treasury, you're taking credit cards, that's PCI. You know, I didn't put it in law enforcement here because I don't think criminal justice, even though it's regulated, is going to end up with all this stuff. But it could be as well. So the regulated agencies within government, especially in scope of this, healthcare. Okay, see the healthcare and public sector cybersecurity framework implementation guide. Well, this obviously just came out. And if you read this, it moves from requiring a HIPAA risk assessment to a NIST cybersecurity framework based risk assessment. This is not going to go away. This NIST CSF business is going to land on everybody. So the ones that just happened, and if you read the blast, you've seen this. The water sector, as regulated by the EPA, rail and aviation, as regulated by the TSA, are getting their new guidance. Right, just the last couple of weeks, they're all getting stuff like this as well. So the train is rolling. Legal. This liability limiting language for contracts is going to be important in an ecosystem like this. And this issue of data collection is probably going to land in your lap as well for evaluation. So those are probably things you want to be interested in. Education sector, same basically as government. Get your assessment ready, get your grant applications in, work on your procurement process. And if you are unregulated in the private sector, better get your security papers ready because they're going to be asked for. You will have
Which
some.
which I which I think gets to George's question in the chat, which is privately owned business, but also critical infrastructure. Does that change your sector? Maybe incentives would give, maybe not. It depends. I mean, the answer, one of the things I saw is if you do any work for the federal government or you do any work for state and local governments, you could be classified as critical for this. So,
Or if you just work for critical infrastructure, right? So if you are a vendor to a chemical manufacturing plant, for example, right? The guidance like this is going to end up going to chemical manufacturing, and it's going to say everybody you do business with has to show security, right? It's absolutely going to happen. Um, and again, if you're unregulated, going to land on you, but look for tax breaks to help you get security controls, because a lot of, especially small companies and ones that were never historically regulated, right? A construction company, for example,
mhm.
going to have to show your papers, and the papers are going to need to be aligned with the NIST framework. Every indication is this is the one size fits all that everybody needs to take up. So Jake, what do you want to say about
Well,
this?
so when you take people through NIST, Mike, why don't you walk through the five,
Okay.
and let's talk about then how to fast track this, because I think what we've seen so far is a lot of folks in the audience are realizing or seeing that they're going to have to fast track, um, you know, working with NIST CSF where they
Mhm.
might not have been before in healthcare. I just talked to a hospital that is they're going to do a risk assessment against this CSF.
Yeah.
We see this all over the place.
We do. In fact, my friend Jim in Bellevue is saying CGIS audits are starting to have you be NIST compliant
Hmm.
ish. Yeah, really. And there has been so much variability and confusion around regulatory requirements. Um, some of them they're not going to be able to uh, really deconvolve, right? So payment card industry is going to keep doing their own thing. I don't know if the finance sector is going to roll that up into this stuff. Um, um, who else? NERC, right? North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They do stuff for the energy sector. They're going to be pretty hands off, but everybody else is going to get funneled into this thing. So there's 5 focus areas of this. It's an outcome based framework. It doesn't say have this control in place. It says make this thing happen. And however you do that is up to you because every organization is different. And Elizabeth, this was published Health and Human Services, not on NIST. And it's not a HIPAA to NIST guide, it's guidance for the health sector about uh, new guidance. So the first bucket is identify here. So identify, yes, it means know what's on your network, but there's more to it than that. It also means identify the methodology that you're going to use for risk assessment. because a requirement is you need to do a risk assessment annually. What methodology are you going to use? And in fact, the one that we use here for our own purposes, we've modified the NIST framework to not be a framework with which you align. It's actually risk based, right? So we think about, what bad outcomes are we trying to avoid: records disclosure, theft, extortion, service disruption, right? Things like that. And so if there is a control objective that is not performing properly or not in place, what's the likelihood that you could end up with records disclosure, theft, extortion, right? And then what would the impact of that be? So it turns it into risk. And then if you've identified a risk, again, you put it through that governance, right? So the spreadsheet to do that I've worked up over the last couple of years with lots of help, does spider charts against maturity level you want to set, stuff like that. And there's lots of these out there. It's notable that the NIST framework is going to get the V5 upgrade pretty soon, and that's going to have a whole lot more privacy stuff in it. So again, this data collection thing is going to be serious. So that's the identify bucket. And then protect. So this is about having preventive controls on your network. It's pretty straightforward, right? You've got to have firewalls, you got to train your users, you need to manage vulnerabilities, you need to conduct an annual risk assessment. So this is probably the longest section in the NIST framework is protect. And then there's detect, which obviously, do you have endpoint detection and response software on your endpoints? Are you monitoring at the network level? Do you manage your detection signatures appropriately? There's a lot of stuff in there about that. And then respond is all about response planning, conducting tabletop exercises, making sure that you actually have not only a framework for how to respond and what people need to be around the table, but also playbooks for different types of failure modes or incidents, right? Account takeover playbook, things like that. And then recover is actually the shortest. Respond and recover, both pretty short sections. Recover is more about documenting process to get back to 100% availability and the state that you were in before an incident. And I would say that respond and recover both have touch points to disaster recovery and business continuity planning.
Now,
So that's basically what's in there.
and Mike in the Michael in the chat says, cybersecurity insurance application process dig into all five of these areas. They
Mm-hmm.
sure do. Which, by the way, for us, for Critical Insight, is one of the main reasons why people have come to us in the last couple of years, is because cyber insurance has said, hey, you have to do these, and we help with that. Now, usually, if you've been to our events, like we don't, our events are educational, and we don't push our services. But this is one of those times where, frankly, our services help with this. And some of our clients asked us, wait, so if I'm going to have to focus on NIST CSF, can you all help me with that? And the truth is that what we provide, the services we provide, do in fact help you in fast tracking NIST CSF alignment, right, Mike?
Yeah. So I'll just go through this real quick and tell you how this. So we'll start in the bottom right there. So gap analysis and risk assessment, that is your assessment against the NIST cybersecurity framework. And turning that into risk so that you can bubble that risk up through your organization and say, look, we need some money. We need to be resourced for this. This is the formalized way of doing that. Vulnerability scanning, right? I mean, the framework itself talks in some detail about vulnerability scanning and making sure that you're not only identifying those, but that they go on some kind of risk register, and you have some type of ritual that you go through to look at those things, formally decide what you're going to do with them, because you can accept vulnerabilities you find, but it's got to be done formally. So, the CSF also talks about your governance organization to make that stuff happen. So, we have continuous vulnerability identification (CVI) that we run off the sensor that we put on your network, And then CVI Pro is where our consultants actually help you beat stuff down if you need to. So again, with the governance and right, the formalization of that, um, testing your stuff before it goes into production. Yeah, we do penetration testing, and you should know that alignment with this CSF business obligates you to start doing things like annual risk assessment, annual policy review, annual training your users, making sure that you're doing a tabletop exercise and a disaster recovery exercise every year. I think those kinds of things where you're probably going to need some partnership in order to get those things ticked off. Those are the things that our consultants do. Obviously regulatory compliance, right? You can assess you against payment card industry or HIPAA. We do lots of HIPAA security risk assessments. It sounds like we're going to be doing those with the NIST cybersecurity framework as a tool now instead of the requirements in HIPAA. So if you're in the health sector and you've never done one of these with the CSF before, you might want to talk to us. And I know some of you, Mike Nixon, some of you on here are not going to have a problem switching to that. But if you do, preparing for an incident, this is a big deal. This is not only having some piece of paper that says here's what we do. There's more to it than that. You need a policy that says here's how we activate an incident. Here's the group that we put together to manage the incident, which is not the same as the response team that's going to be designated, right? When you're incident management, you have finance at the table, you have legal at the table, you have executive leadership at the table, right? And then you designate a response team and they use a playbook, and all of those pieces got to be there, and then you got to practice that. So this is what my deputy CISO John Luke Peck runs our incident response and planning division, and he's very good at what he does. And then there's the 24/7 365 monitoring, having our analysts investigate events on your network. If we need to put out a small fire at 3 a.m. on a Saturday, we can do that. We can quarantine an asset remotely. We monitor your cloud properties, your endpoints, your IoT, your network, and we always have eyes on. And then active incident response. If something happens, you got to have somebody on speed dial. And so that's again John Luke. He and his division. There are periods when they don't get much sleep, when there's an active campaign going on and we have lots of incidents all over the place. Those guys get real popular, so
And
it's good to have a retainer.
and I think it's important as folks look at what's going on with the White House strategy is all of a sudden there's a lot of focus on this, and there is an ability, and I've heard this from one local city here, that it helps you get the attention of folks to say, hey, I've always wanted to be able to do a bunch of these things, and now I can get my elected leaders, or I can get my executive for there it was elected leaders to pay attention. And one of the things I do want to point out here is when you're looking at the threat detection and investigation, from our standpoint, we integrate with what you already have. So, if you have Dark Trace, we integrate with that. If you have, Sentinel
CrowdStrike,
One, CrowdStrike,
Defender.
whatever,
Yeah.
we integrate with that. Um, and one thing to note up here for the incident response plan development, this is if you need one from scratch, and then the plan review is if you have one that you want us to look at before you do a tabletop exercise and help you, update it. And this is how managed detection and response works. So this is for an on-prem network where we're watching it. We have a collector on the inside of the firewall. The traffic and event data is going to our security operations center. Cloud environments is AWS and Azure. Remote endpoints, we just talked about those. CrowdStrike, Microsoft Defender, whatever you have. And then SaaS platforms, O365. And actually, I will tell you all this now. We're about to release the ability to take action on O365, so that we can take rapid quarantine actions on O365 if you want us to. Some folks do, some folks don't. And then, as always, the Security Operations Center is doing threat hunting and investigations in your environment. Um, Mike, so how do you talk to electeds and execs? By the way, Mike loves the word electeds.
I do. And Microsoft puts a squiggly line under that, and I don't know why. Because this is what we always said, the electeds. Didn't you you have the kind of exec briefing?
I do have an exec briefing that we did last week, and I'm going to put a couple of things in the chat here. One of them is the executive briefing that you can give to your elected leaders or your execs. That's a bit of an easier read than listening to us in one of these. I just put the link there in the chat. The other thing, as Mike goes through this, that I wanted to put in the chat is Mike has been forced into by me. Just kidding. He loves doing this. One-on-one chats with folks. So if you want to set time up with us to discuss your security posture, and discuss any of the services to help you fast track on NIST, I'm going to put a calendar link in the chat for one of our folks, and she can put time. She can get you time with Mike. So I'll put that in the chat as well. Mike, why don't you go through this slide while I do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is if there are questions being asked by your elected officials, by your executives, by your C-suite, what does this mean for us? So definitely, you're going to get asked for security papers. You are going to be asked for security papers, depending on who you do business with. Some of it's going to be more serious than other things. So again, if you not only do business with any level of government, but a critical sector, the mandate is they're going to have to check you out. So, this is also going to be a bigger issue for shareholders, especially with this, some of the things that have happened recently that have kind of seeped into the C suite and start looking like negligence, right? Everybody is starting to be afraid and they want to show their security. On the other hand, you need to start looking at your vendors more because this issue of coming in through the third party door is not going away. As we looked at the health sector data breaches, it's clear third parties are being increasingly used to do this. So you're going to need to get real good at third party risk management. Again, there are ways to hand roll it, and if we want to talk later, we can talk about ways to do that. There are services like UpGuard is one that I like, but business associate agreements and the contract language that you implement is going to be pretty important here. And then finally, security and procurement. You're gonna you take the the tip that's being given you by the federal government. Don't buy it if it's not secure, and move the cost for security onto vendors. It's a great strategy, but that's got to be formalized in your procurement process and implemented. Okay.
And as we wrap up here, as I said, you can schedule time with Mike on that Calendly link that I put in the chat, or you can email me or email Mike. I saw some folks who wanted the slides. Go ahead and shoot me an email, jake@criticalinsight.com, and I'll get you the slides. One other thing I want to say is every time we do a webinar, we put a survey in the end because we want to know, hey, was this helpful? Like, did you like this? And so my colleague Ginny is going to put the survey link in the chat, and go ahead and click it. And the other thing, by the way, is for everybody who fills out a survey, we give a donation to the Society for Information Management, where my guest Mike will also do a session for them on this at some point as well. But we appreciate folks being here. Mike, final thoughts for folks?
It's going to be interesting to watch how this unfolds and how this percolates down to businesses of all size based on this effort to manage critical sectors, regulate them a little more, and regulate them in a way that doesn't let them buy stuff unless you can't show that you're secure. Is We're going to have to watch this, but I think this is going to work. It's not like all of the other efforts at a national strategy that were just shelfware.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we look forward to spending time with all of you and helping you fast track to NIST CSF. We appreciate you being here today, and always great to see you all.
Yep.
Don't forget, hit that Calendly link, email me if you want the slides, and take that survey because it helps us get better.
Yeah,
Mike reads every one of the lines of feedback that you
I
all
do.
send. So thanks, everybody.
All right.
Bye bye.
Thanks, everybody.